Good morning. Good morning. It's the most wonderful time of the year, and that's daylight savings. Everybody loves this, right? Everybody still on board for this idea? Yeah. Can't wait for that to not happen ever again. It's just a lot of fun. It's really fun when you're supposed to I would assume today should be the day that we should have started an 11 o'clock service, by the way, because I have a feeling we'll see a great influx at 11 of people that show up. But it's crazy. Oh man, I don't love this. Hopefully your week was better than today, and hopefully that you had a great week. This week I had an experience I did not expect to maybe ever have in my life. One of my clients that I work with, I do some consulting, different things. And I have this one client that I work with all the time, and I'm on retainer with them. And so she just bought a new car, and it's a McLaren. And I don't know if you're familiar with those. Apparently, they're fancy. And I know nothing about them. And so she had driven the car to work that day, and we were meeting, and it was this gorgeous, it's guys, it's bright purple. Like the whole thing, you can't miss this car, even if you want to. It's super loud, it's bright purple, and it's the extended body. It's this unbelievable situation. And so she drove it to work that day. You could hear it for miles coming down the road. And she got to work, and we were just talking, and I said, you know what, hey, my car's in the shop. Now my car is not a McLaren. It's to be honest, there are moments when I put my guitar in the back of my car and I'm like, oh no, the guitar is worth more than the car that it's in. That's a bad day, but that's where my life is. I don't really do these things. I don't buy fancy things. And I was like, I'm good with not having a car like that. But she has this one, and I couldn't dream of having it because it's worth more than my house. And I said, well, my car's in the shop, and we got done meeting. I said, you know what, I'm just going to DoorDash some food here for lunch, and if you want to, I'll get you something too. And she was like, why are you DoorDashing something? I said, well, my car's in the shop. And she was like, well, then just take mine and go get lunch. And I was like, well, I don't know how to operate yours. And so I went, and she gave me the keys, and she said, let me show you one thing. I need to show you one thing about the car. And she took me out and she said, this is the button that you hit to make the fire shoot out the back. I was like, so this is just a Batmobile. That's what this is. And I was like, okay, so this is the important thing, is how the fire shoots out the back. So I get in the car, I'm driving to go find food. Guys, this was not a fun experience. This is intimidating. There is a lot happening, right? There's a lot to think about. And you're like, I don't want to mess this up. I don't want to wreck this. I don't want to do something wrong. It's very intimidating, isn't it? And so I'm driving, and there's a bunch of, I get to a stoplight. Now, granted, guys, I'm driving the speed limit, it's Clearwater. I'm driving 30 miles an hour. I'm driving 25 miles an hour because I'm terrified. Speed limit's 30 miles an hour. And so this car is angry at me because it's like, we got places to get to, and you're barely moving. And I'm like, I just have to putter along like a grandmother. And so I pull up to a stoplight, and no joke, there's these 14-year-olds on this sidewalk, these boys, and they look over at me in a purple McLaren. And the first thing they yell is like, rev the engine. And I was like, oh, okay. And so I thought, I know how to make fire shoot out the back. And so I put it in neutral, and I rev the engine, and I hit the button, and fire. I mean, a lot of fire, like dragon's breath fire, shot out the back of the car. And it made this loud noise like it was going to explode. And the earth was going to crumble underneath it. And the boys saw it, and no joke, they didn't even applaud. They weren't happy about it. Their faces dropped, and they went running, just sprinting down the sidewalk, just gone. They thought the whole thing was literally going to explode on them. And so now they're gone down the street, and I'm just sitting there in this purple McLaren with the top down, mind you. And so I drive my 25 miles an hour, and I catch up with them, and they're like, it's okay. The car's okay, guys. It's okay. And the whole time I was a nervous wreck, I'm driving this thing, and it's like, it's so much pressure, and I feel like there's so much going on because there's something else happening, right? Why am I nervous about driving this? Why is there something that's at stake when I'm driving this? Is it because it's an expensive car, or is it because at the end of the day, I know that the car doesn't belong to me, right? Why are you nervous about this? Even if you drive somebody else's car who's doesn't have a McLaren, why are you nervous about it? Because there's part of it where you realize this doesn't belong to me. Right? You want to take care of it. You want to do better with it because you realize I want this thing to be in perfect condition. I want everything to be right about it because I'm just stewarding this thing. I'm just using this thing for now. This is just mine for a while. This is just mine temporarily. And sometimes we get these things out of balance, but I think one of the hardest things for us to realize if we're people who follow Jesus is that our entire life, everything about it is not just ours. We come to grips with this reality. And I think it's a good thing that we realize that everything we're doing, it's not just ours. We're not the only one affected by this. We get to steward what we have, but it's not fully ours, right? Your money is not fully yours. If you know anything about this, what we realize if we look at this world around us is that there is a God who has gifted us with the ability to make money and the ability to have money, but at the end of the day, everything we have is not ours, it is His, right? If we look at this and we realize our relationships, the relationships that have been put around us, they are not just relationships that we can feel good about ourselves, but they are relationships that show other people who our God is because we love them as we love Him, right? It's not just a relationship for our own sake, not just a relationship for us. There's more at play here. Maybe it's in your family. Your family, I don't believe, is just your family. It's not just for you. It's not just for you to make a little empire of a family. It's not so you have a clan and maybe a posse or whatever. Your family is there because God gave those children, gave that spouse to you. And it's your job to love them as Christ loved the church. That's how this is supposed to work, right? Maybe it's your body. It's one of the hardest things for us to realize is that our body is actually not just ours. That this body was given to us and we get to steward this thing, but it's not just fully ours to do whatever we want with. There is a spirit contained within it, and that spirit is the spirit of the living God, and we have to steward this body we've been given. We have to be careful with it. We have to take care of it. There's something about it that matters, how we use it, whether it's sexually or physically. We have to be careful with how we use it because there's something else going on in us. And maybe it's your career. I don't believe that you just got your career because you really are just that smart. I don't think I did either. I think that we are in the spots we're in because we see throughout the gospel that we see that we are supposed to work, but not for the approval of man, but so that we can show God through the places He's put us. See, it's not just us. It's not just us driving around having a good time. We are sharing this thing. Remember a couple weeks ago, we looked at this idea of that we are both dust and we are spirit. Now, I know you guys have not forgotten that sermon at all. I know that every word I say in here just sticks with you throughout your week. I know you have nothing else going on, so I know that you've not forgotten anything I said about that. But if you remember, what we looked at is the idea that your body, that you yourself, you are not just dust. You're not just dust that's been put together, but you are something else, this spirit that comes inside of you. And what we're doing right now in this act of Lent is we're rebalancing those two things. Because we can look at all these things, whether it's our family or our body or our careers or our money or our relationships, we can look at all those things and just say those are things of earth, they don't really matter. Or we can look at them and say they're only spiritual things, but there's some kind of balance that we have to find between the two. And the goal of Lent is to give up some of one to find more of the other. And my guess is we need to give up some of the things here on earth so that we can elevate and find more of the spiritual side of who we are. We're going to have to give something up. We can't contain all of both. We have to give up one to accommodate the other. We looked at this idea that God creates us out of dust and our skin is made of dust, but then He breathes His Spirit into us, and now we're a both. We're a both and, not an either or. It's actually one of my favorite things because right now science, I was reading about it just the other day, that in science, this is still one of the greatest mysteries, by the way, is that there is no explanation. There's no good explanation for why your skin holds together. Just so you know, it's just an interesting fact. You can look it up. But you are dust. You're just dust. Why is it dust that holds together while you're alive, and then when you're dead, it just goes back to nothing? Like, why does this exist? Why does that live? Why does it heal itself? How does dust do this? And there is really no great scientific explanation for it, except for that something once picked up dust and breathed into it, and now it's alive. There's a spirit within it. There's something else. We have to balance these two things. And in Lent, there might be things you've given up, whether it's food, whether it's digital, whatever it might be. You might have given some things up so that you can reconnect, not with the things of earth, but maybe with the things of heaven, not with the mortal part of you, but with the immortal part of you, not with the dust part of you, but with the spiritual part of you. And we have to find this balance of these two things. And during Lent, that's what we're trying to pursue. And today I want to look at a passage that kind of talks about these two parts, this part of earth, this part of heaven, this part that's mortal, this part that's immortal, these two areas of our lives. It's a famous verse. You've probably heard it before. Even if you're not really familiar with church or this is new to you, the whole thing of Jesus, you've probably heard this verse in more than one place. Politicians have used it. For better or worse, and we've seen it in movies. We've seen this phrase all over the place. If you have a Bible, you can find this in Matthew chapter 16. And if you have a Bible, I'd encourage you to turn there. If you have a phone that has the Bible on it, turn there in Matthew 16. But there's this verse that shows up in Matthew 16, verse 26, one of the most famous verses that Jesus ever says. This is what he says: "What good will it be for a man if he gains the whole world, but he forfeits his soul?" You see these two areas he's talking about. There's this world, this dust, this part of us that is this mortal side. And then he talks about this soul, this spiritual side, this other part that is immortal, this part that is spirit, this part that goes on beyond us, this part that's this God breathed into us. We have to find both of those. But he says, what good is it if we gain all of one and not all of the other? Now, maybe you're familiar with this passage. Maybe you're like, man, I've heard this, and I can't believe we're going to go into this. And we are. We're going to spend time on this today. But real quick, before we go into that, what I want to do is I want to back us up a little bit. Because what happens in this verse is very important. And what is said is a beautiful sentence. But to be honest with you, where Jesus says this is more important or as important than what he says. Where this whole thing is set is fascinating. And really the where of when he says this whole thing really plays out in a big way as to what he's saying here. So I want to back us up to verse 13. So if you want to turn there, if you want to find your way to verse 13, we're going to start there and we're going to kind of work our way to where we see Jesus say this sentence. But again, where he says it, the location he's standing in, this is a spectacular thing, and it's not simple. It's not subtle. Jesus is being very direct about why he's saying this verse and where he's saying it at. The location he's standing in is very important. So if you back up to verse 13, we're going to walk through this for a little bit and just kind of go verse by verse through this section. So in verse 13, it says this: "When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, 'Who do people say the Son of Man is?'" Now, if you were here in the Firm Foundation series that we did just a little bit ago, Janessa kind of went through some of this stuff, and she did a great job kind of talking about what this region means. But I want to kind of dive into what Caesarea Philippi is. I know you all are like, I know Caesarea Philippi. Who doesn't? But I want to talk about it just a little bit more and what this means. Okay? Caesarea Philippi is a specific location. And it was located it was about 25 miles north of the Sea of Galilee. And it was a place that was at the cusp of really being at the edge of like the Jewish faith and right on the inside of really the Greco-Roman world. They were kind of like butted up against one another. And this was right at the crest and kind of right at that peak of where the Jewish world ended and where the Greco-Roman world ended. And it was called Caesarea Philippi because there was a guy, his name was Herod. If you know King Herod, Herod the Great, he was the guy who called himself the King of the Jews. If you're not familiar with that, it was not Jesus who first called himself or ever called himself the King of the Jews. Actually, Herod called himself this, and there's a reason that he felt like he was entitled to be the King of the Jews. He was located inside the Jewish province, and he was the king of Rome over that area. And so he was the king of the Jews, and he decided that he would have this city, and he took this city called Caesarea, at this time it was called Paneas, but Caesarea Philippi, and he gave it to his son, Philip, for his 16th birthday. He gave the city to his son, Philip. I don't know what you got for your 16th birthday. I don't know what you were hoping for your 16th birthday. I thought it'd be cool. I wanted a truck. It was like a Chevy S10. It was not a McLaren. It's like a really basic truck. That's what I was hoping for. He got a whole city. Now, my guess is his dad forgot his birthday and didn't have a present. And he was like, what'd you get me? And he was like, city, right? Right? So you got a city, and you can have whichever one you want, really, bud. Because that's kind of an interesting gift. So he gave his son this city, and his son's name is Philip. So Philip moved into the area and named it no longer was it Caesarea Paneas. We'll get to Paneas in just a second. It was called Caesarea Philippi for him. So it was part Caesar's and part Philip's. And this was now Philip's gift, and he decided that he would have a new temple built on this place. Now, the temples that were built there, the reason it was called Caesarea Paneas, or whatever you want to call it, Caesarea Paneas was the name before this. Caesarea Paneas is for a specific reason. And it really is because it became a pagan place. Now, this is before pagan meant what we think of. When we think of pagan, we think of really a bad thing or a negative connotation. Pagan did not mean that in this world. Pagan was just a term, kind of a junk drawer term or a boilerplate term for all other religions. All religions just fell into paganism. Paganism was just any world religion that was not Judaism, essentially, at this time, okay? Pagan, actually, if you ever look it up, this is kind of a fun fact, but pagan is actually, the word pagan originally means country dweller, because it was somebody who wasn't part of the religious culture of the city of Jerusalem. So if they lived outside the city, they were considered pagans because they stayed too far away from the religious culture to be considered part of Judaism, so they were pagans. But it became known as just kind of this junk drawer term for all religions that were not Judaism. And when Philip took it over, before he was there, the place was called Paneas because it was for the god Pan. And the Paneas was for the god Pan. It's kind of a Panera situation. They have great bread bowls. You'd love it. It's adorable in there. And so, but it was this Paneas place, and they had Pan is who was for. Now Pan, let's get into this for just a second, okay? Pan is one of my favorite Greek gods, one of the most confusing Greek gods. But Pan was a god who was half fawn and half man. So he had the legs of a fawn and the body, the upper half of a man. Now, I would show you pictures of Pan, but guys, they are all X-rated. I mean, he is graphic. He is, again, the man part, it's like he's like a hunky Mr. Tumnus. If you remember Mr. Tumnus from Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, it's like if McConaughey played Mr. Tumnus in the movies or something, or if you're like a Denzel person. I don't know what your situation is. But if like The Rock was Mr. Tumnus, that would be where we're at, okay? Okay. So yeah, sorry ladies, I don't apparently keep up well enough. And so if you had that's what he is. He's kind of a ripped dude who is half fawn, half man. Literally every statue of him was either him seducing a woman or it was him having sex with a goat. And there were many statues of that. He was big on that situation. And he encouraged that within what he did. Now, he apparently played the flute, apparently a real sexy flute player, to entice women and to seduce women. That was his go-to move, which you guys know how that works. I mean, you see a dude playing the flute and you're like, oh man, that is hot, you know? So apparently he played jazz flute or Yaz flute. He played jazz flute and just was real attractive in that way. And so that was what his go-to was. And if you see these things, you'll see that he was known for this. That he was not just the god of sexuality, although that was part of it. He was also the god of agriculture and flocks. So he was known for being the god essentially of wealth at this point, right? Your flocks were how much you were worth. Your agriculture was worth how much you were worth. And so your money came through him as well. So Pan was a guy this god who had become this thing. And really the whole motto, the whole thing with Pan was really this anything goes. It was an anything goes mentality. And you just have all the fun you can and you just go for it and live it up. And when you do that, everything's going to work out perfectly. I lived in Casper, Wyoming for a number of years, and I can't explain why, because nobody lives in Casper, Wyoming. And I mean that, nobody lives in Casper, Wyoming. And I was living in Casper, and I had a lady who went to our church who came, and she was like, Kevin, I think you should audition for a musical. there's a musical going on at our community college. I think you'd be perfect for it. And so she was like, would you think about auditioning for it? And I was like, sure. And I said, what's the musical though? I'd think about it. That sounds cool, but like, what's the musical? And she goes, it's called Peter Pan. And I was like, oh, I've heard of him. That'd be cool. And she goes, and if you get the right parts, you get to fly. And I was like, I'm in. Let's do it. And so I auditioned for this musical, and it was a community college in Casper, Wyoming. Not exactly like it. It wasn't Broadway, let's just say that. So I went in, I auditioned, and I was a human who could kind of carry a tune, and they were like, that counts, you're our guy. And so I played John, who's the older brother. There's Wendy and John and another Michael. Nobody cared about him because John was there. And so I got to play John, and that was a flying role, guys. I got to fly. Like every night I got to fly. And this thing, so we had practice after practice because there were actual college students getting their degrees off of this thing. Like they were getting college credit for it. Meanwhile, I was one of like 3 third graders who were just there because we wanted to be sleep deprived and try to fly occasionally. And so I went to these practices every single night, and I spent a ton of time on this. And I remember there was a man there, and his name was, oh goodness. And I really should remember this because last night I texted my mom, what was his name? And like, I don't know how your mom works. I texted my mom, I said, what was the man's name who directed the play of Peter Pan? And she got on the Facebooks, and she talked to every human who lives in Casper, Wyoming. And last night, it was like midnight, I get, no joke, it's 6 emails just in a row of he apparently passed away a few years ago, and it's every single obituary, every single person's notes back to her, every Facebook message screenshotted and sent to me so that I could read all of it because I needed that much research on this man. I just needed his name. That's all I needed. But now all of Casper, Wyoming is abuzz with getting me this information apparently. And I don't remember it. I actually don't remember it right now. So it was worth it. Yeah. It's somewhere. Anyways, it doesn't matter. He was a very nice guy. I keep wanting to say Dr. Unruh, but it wasn't. Anyways, so he shows up, and I remember he was like the big musical producer for Casper, Wyoming, so he showed up, no joke, like manure on his boots to come talk to us about Peter Pan. And he sat us down and he said, guys, I want to tell you about Peter Pan because I want you to get in character. And I was just thinking, okay, I'm just here to fly. And he starts telling us about Peter Pan. And here's the thing, Peter Pan, there's a reason he's named Peter Pan. Pan comes from this God. He was named after this God, Pan. Because there was this idea that you should just do what you want whenever you want to. You should just go for it, and everything will just work out fine. And that you should have a never land. That's kind of the way it should be for you. You should have a neverland, and everything should just be according to your rules. And you should never grow up, right? You should never have to worry about that, but you should also never back down, and you should never surrender to anyone. You should never apologize to anyone. You should never forgive anyone. You should never let other people in. You should never let anything out. We live in a world like this still, don't we? Where honestly, you can build the kingdom you want. You can go for it if you want to. You can try to make that kind of world for yourself. And it doesn't matter who you hurt, including yourself. It doesn't matter. You do what you want when you want to. Everything will work out. We still live in this world, don't we? In the 60s, actually, there were philosophers who came along and really started to write in the 1960s specifically about Pan and started to integrate the same philosophy we saw behind Pan into American culture. You do what you want, whatever feels good, it'll all work itself out. There's no consequence, and it doesn't matter, again, who you hurt or who hurts you. Those things don't matter anymore. And Jesus says, you can build that kingdom. You can make your little empire like that. You can build that neverland, but at the end of the day, the only thing it's going to take from you is your soul. I mean, go for it. But you're going to lose something in return, and you're going to lose your soul. And it's interesting because Jesus takes his disciples to this location, which would have been literally, it would have been temple after temple after temple dedicated to the god Pan. And during the year, they would have had massive festivals of prostitution. They would have encouraged bestiality. They would have had all these things going on in this city. And it was this big place with many temples designed to be for the god of Pan. That's where Jesus takes his disciples to ask them this question. What are people saying about me? Who do you say I am? You see the significance of where he's at when he asks this question? And he asks them, he says, who do people say the Son of Man is? Now this question, Son of Man, if you're wondering, like, what does that term mean? This is Jesus' favorite term for himself. It comes out of Daniel chapter 7. He says it a lot. If you're wondering, like, why does he use that one of all the terms? Honestly, we don't know. He just seems to connect with that idea of being the Son of Man. And then they reply, so the disciples are with him, and they reply, all the disciples look at him and they say, some say you're John the Baptist. Other people say you're Elijah. Still others say Jeremiah or one of the prophets. Now these make sense. John the Baptist was killed just recently before this moment. He had been killed, but people believed he was going to come back to life, that he was a ghost or whatever, and he might have been a ghost living inside of Jesus, which is kind of weird. Others say Elijah. Remember, Elijah never died in the Old Testament. Elijah, he was taken up into heaven, and so people believe that Elijah might come back. In fact, the last book of our Old Testament in Malachi, the last line of Malachi is a prophecy saying Elijah will come back. And so people believe that Jesus might be Elijah. He might be this reincarnated Elijah or this Elijah who never died, who came back. And it says, still others say Jeremiah or one of the prophets. That doesn't mean one of the prophets past tense. Could mean you're a good prophet right now. You're a good man right now. And that's good enough. And you're good at what you do. But Jesus looks at them. He doesn't stop there. With all this commotion around him, and he looks at them and he says, but what about you? He asks. Who do you say I am? This is a terrifying moment. These guys have been following Jesus for a long time, and at this point, like, they should know everything about him, and this is the quiz. Like, this is the final exam. This is where they got to have the answer. And Jesus says, but what about you? I'm not worried about them anymore. I'm worried about you. Who do you say I am? And then right after this, it says, Simon Peter answered, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Now, Peter doesn't get answers right very often. If you follow the scripture, you'll find out that Peter's not great at this. This is like the one time where Peter does it. He nails it, does a good job, gets the answer right. But notice what he says. He says, you are the Christ. Now, this word Christ here, just so you know, this is not Jesus' last name. His name is not Jesus Christ. Like, he's not like Mr. Christ. That's not what his address said. Like, his mail did not come to that. His Hotmail wouldn't have been Jesus.Christ or whatever. Like, he would have this was not his last name. Christ is a Greek term. It's the word Christos, which means Messiah. It's the same as the Hebrew term Meshiach, which is this other word for Messiah. So really what he's saying is, you are this Son of the living God. Now, this is kind of a dig, just so you know, just by the way, because Pan is the only Greek god to have believed to have died. He died under the reign of Caesar Tiberius. This god no longer lived. Caesar Tiberius, just again, if you're doing the math, is the ruler when Jesus comes to become this new rabbi on the scene. And people saw this as the mark of the end of the Greek gods and the beginning of a new God who was taking over, this new Messiah, Jesus. And so their God has died. This Pan God has died. And it's believed that Peter might be making a dig at him, saying, you are the Son of the living God, because this one is dead. You're the Son of the living God. There's something going on here. And he says, you're a Messiah. You're Jesus, the Messiah. Jesus, the Christos. Like this restaurant over here, Christos. That's the same word, Messiah, okay? So you're Jesus, the Christos. And then it says, Jesus replies to him, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by man, but by your Father in heaven. Peter, you got it right, and you didn't confuse me with other people. I mean, Jesus is asking this question because he's going like, who do you think I am? Who do you think I am? And guys, if I'm being honest with us, like, we get this question wrong all the time because we get Jesus confused with a lot of other things. right? Jesus is saying, listen, I'm not Pan. I'm not Oprah. I'm not Dr. Phil. Like I'm not your favorite politician. I'm not even your pastor. That's not who I am. And he's saying, you got this right because this wasn't revealed to you by man. This is something that only God can really show you, and you got this right. And he says, and I tell you, Peter, on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. Real quick, just so you know, fun fact, the name Peter here, he says that you are Peter. Peter is the word rock here. It's the word Petra. By the way, before this moment, that name has never been a name before. Jesus literally just says, you are rock. It's not a capitalized, not a proper noun. It's just a noun. It's not a name. And Jesus just says, you're a rock. It's like the millennial way of naming kids, where you just look at things and you name your kid whatever that is. Like you're like, blanket, you're a blanket, or your pillow, or your apple, or your fence, or whatever we name kids these days. That's kind of the way that they do this, is you just look at something and name it. Jesus actually is naming him just straight up the word rock. Not even the rock, not even like he's Dwayne Johnson. Like he's just saying, you're a rock. That's what you are. And I would actually, I don't know about you, I would think this is nice in some ways, but it's also a little bit offensive. Like you're dumb as like that kind of thing would not be great. Like you're not a smart guy, Peter, you're a rock. But Jesus is saying you're a rock. This is actually a symbolism right here that's happening between Jesus and Peter, where they're almost exchanging titles as well as names. And so what happens is he says, you're Jesus, the Christ, and Jesus is saying back to him, you're Peter, the rock. Like they're making this switch of things. In fact, in Greek, the word rock doesn't make any sense here. But anyways, he says, you're now Peter. You're now a new person. You're on this rock. I'll build my church. The gates of Hades will not overcome it. The gates of Hades, actually where they're standing at this moment, there was a spring that was believed to be the gate of Hades. There was a spring there that was the headwaters for the Jordan River, and Jesus is saying, the gates of Hades, the gates of hell, will not overcome this. And he's talking about this church that he's going to build upon Peter and what's going to happen there. And he says, I will give you the keys of the kingdom. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. This is a rabbi's type of teaching. He's saying, whatever you do here will not just be, not that we're going to endorse it, we're going to let you take the lead, but he's saying we are going to trust that God is going to guide you with what you're binding, the things you're tightening up on, and the things you're loosening up on. And this is true. To see this in Acts, Peter does this. He actually follows through on binding and loosing these things. And he says, then he warned his disciples not to tell anyone he was the Messiah, which is a real weird situation, right? Like Jesus just has this big moment with them. And then he says, and by the way, don't tell anybody about this. Now, this isn't like a felt cute, might delete later situation where he's like, I like it now, but don't keep it on the DL. It's not that he's afraid of something. It's that he's not done with the work he's doing yet. And he wants them to not tell anybody because he will die as soon as people find out about this. And it's fascinating because what he builds this upon is such an important moment. In this thing, that question right there, scholars argue that the question that Jesus asks when he says, who do you say I am? That question is the fulcrum point of this entire book of Matthew. That Matthew's entire book leads up to one moment, and the one moment is that question of who do you say I am? And you can read the entire book as all of the book leading up to that moment and all of the book after that proving that Jesus is who Peter said he was. And it's not just a literary device. This isn't just like some kind of cool little literary device. This is literally written so that Matthew walks us to the same place. He walks us to the point where we are in the sandals of the disciples, and we are now standing with Jesus at Caesarea Philippi in this this pan-God's world, where we're looking around at all these other things, this neverland that's been created, and we're on the cusp of this faith that's been there for a long time, but this new understanding of just do whatever you want, whenever you want. We're standing there now on the mountain with them, and we are now in the disciples' sandals, and Jesus is now asking not just Peter, but he's asking us, who do you say I am? It's believed that this is a fulcrum moment in the book. This is the whole thing. This is why the whole book is written, for that one question to happen. And the thing that we have to think about is maybe you're in a spot today where you've been here for a while, and maybe you're in a place where you're like, I need to I need to have this conversation. Maybe you've been around here for a while. Listen, if you're in a spot where we've had people in this church for many times and many years where they've been atheists or agnostics, and that's great. We love having people here that don't believe like we do. We've had other people of other faiths in this room that are Buddhists. We've even had people who are Muslim in this room before and talking about Jesus, and it's a great thing. We love it. And at the end of the day, we're all for it. We love having that ability to have people in here, but there's going to be a day that I believe that Jesus is going to look at each one of us and he's going to ask this question, but not about everybody else, but about you. Who do you say I am? And you're going to have to answer this, and your entire life, in my opinion, is going to be lived in one of two worlds. One is everything leading up to that question, and the rest of your life is going to be it's going to be everything following that question. And you're going to prove that or live that for the rest of your life, whatever you think about that. A.W. Tozer once wrote that the most important thing about us is what we think about God. The most important thing about us is what we think about God. And the reason he wrote that is because I believe it's true. That what we believe about God will inform, it will infect every decision we make. If we believe certain things about God, it will show us how we live in our families. It will show us how we live with our careers. It will show us how we treat our bodies. It will show us how we handle our money. It will show us how we handle our relationships, because what we believe about God is how we will live. And if we believe that God is angry, if we believe that God is vindictive, if we believe that God is not kind, we're going to live that way. If we believe that there's a God who is loving and who cares about us and a God that we are in relationship with, we will live in that way. And it will affect every one of those things. And Jesus is asking this question because he's saying, where do you fall on this? Where are you at? Who do you think I am? Do you think that I'm just like everything else? Have you confused me with something less than what I am? And he has to ask this question to each one of us. Have you confused me with something less than I am? And he says, because what he's going to build is this thing called the church. Now, the word church there is not just the word church. And if you've been around here, you know that I hate this word because it's not the word church. Jesus never uses the word church in the entire New Testament. This word right here he says that he will build his church upon this rock. It's called the ecclesia. It's not a word that means like church like we think of church. It's just a word that means gathering. Now, you could have an ecclesia of people eating donuts. You can have an ecclesia of people like watching football. You can have an ecclesia of people who are just like hanging out at a coffee shop. Ecclesia has no spiritual connotation. The word church has this spiritual connotation, right? It kind of feels like it's a thing. It's a spiritual location. And when Jesus says, he says, I'm going to build this upon this rock. And there is a point right now where I think it's fascinating because maybe you're in a spot where you feel like we are in this up against the world around us thing, where it feels like the world around us is in this Neverland situation. It's in this pan world, and we're up against it so close, and that it feels like it's pushing in on us. Does anybody feel this way, where sometimes it feels like it's pushing in on you and it's taking over your life? And the good news is Jesus is saying that's not going to happen because he is going to build this gathering, and the gates of hell itself will not stand against it. And to this day, just so you know, if you go back and you look at these temples that were dedicated to the god Pan, by the 4th century, every single one of those temples had become a church in the name of Jesus Christ. Then that thing started to spread and spread. Now it is all the way across the world. Look where we are. We are not in Jerusalem. We are not in Israel. We are now following Jesus with billions of people all over the world. This thing has spread and spread now in Southeast Asia and throughout Africa. We have the biggest spread of the gospel we have ever had. In fact, in China, the gospel spread faster with more people than it has ever spread in the last 2,000 years of its history. The thing is still moving. It's still changing lives. It's still transforming people because people are being asked, who do you say I am? Have you watered this down? Is it less than it should be? Or are you saying that you are the only one who will save us, who will pull us out of this? You are the only one who is the Messiah, who has come for me and come for us. And because of that, I want to change the way that I handle my money. I want to change the way I handle my relationships. I want to change the way I handle even my own body. I want to change the way that I handle my family. I want to change the way I handle my career, because I see that what I think about you is the most important thing about me. And it can feel like we're up against that right now. And Jesus is saying we have to rebalance these things. We have to put these things back in perspective. And he goes from there out of this Neverland talk, and he starts this thing right after it in verse 21. It says, "From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, chief priests, and teachers of the law, that he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life." He's saying this is something that has to happen. He starts to explain to his disciples, I have to do this. This is something that's necessary for me to accomplish. In the next verse, Peter, verse 22, Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. "Never, Lord," he said, "this shall never happen to you." Now, in case you're from the Catholic tradition, what happened right before this is we saw that moment where Jesus says, "Peter, you're the rock I'm going to build my church on, and whatever you bind and whatever you loose, we're going to do the same." There's this idea of an infallibility of the Pope, and we don't have a lot of time to get into this, but the Pope makes the right decisions, and therefore we all stand on the Pope's decisions. Because people believe that Jesus is saying, "Peter, whatever you say is right. Whatever you do is right." I would say that's probably not true, because look at this verse right here, this next verse. Peter does this, and in the next verse, Jesus says that he calls him Satan. It says that, the very next verse, it says, Jesus turned to Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men." He just called Peter Satan. So I'm going to say maybe it's not an infallibility of every decision that you make is just right. It's just all okay. He just got called Satan. I don't know if Jesus ever talked firmly to you. I don't know if you ever felt God speaking in your heart of conviction. I hope he's never called you Satan. It's a big jump right there. And so Peter's like feeling pretty strong. He's like, "I'm the rock now. I do what I want. I'm the Dwayne Johnson of this group." And then all of a sudden, he gets put in his place. And he's called Satan. Why is that? Because Jesus tells him, no, you're thinking of the things of earth. You've lost the balance of these two things. And you're so concerned with me having this ministry or this career or this family or this whatever you want to call it here on this earth that you've forgotten what my entire mission is. And it's something spiritual and it's something much bigger. And you've gotten so bogged down with the things of earth that you have not remembered what is the other half of you, the soul, the part that we are here for. And he says, then Jesus looks at his disciples and says, "If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life," notice that deny himself, by the way, that's the whole idea of Lent. "For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will find it." And then he says that line, "What good will it be for a man if he gains the whole world, but he forfeits his soul?" He gives up his soul. What good will it be? What does all this matter if you gain all the things, the money, the relationships, the family, the career, even the body? What good will it be if you gain all those things, but you've given up the very soul within you? What he's saying is there's a trading game here. And you can have all of one, but it's going to cost you a lot of the other. I would guess that many of us, if we're being honest, many of us are in a place where it doesn't happen overnight. It's not one decision and suddenly everything that is spiritual is gone and we are all in on this world and the earth around us. I don't think it's just that. I think it slowly chips away, doesn't it? Just little by little. We start to make one decision over another. We start to treat our body in a certain way. We start to pursue certain things physically and maybe sexually that we start to chip away at that decision making. And suddenly we start to look back and say, wait, hold on, where's my soul in this whole thing? Like, what's happening? What's the damage I'm doing to me, to others? Maybe it's in your career. We start to just chip away at those little things. And we start to go a certain direction. Then we look back and we're like, wait, where am I? What is happening? Have you ever been in that spot? Where you've gone so far to one direction that you're like, where was I in this whole thing? What is going on inside of me? I'm a mess now. Because it just chips away at you. And I think what can happen is we can gain so much of one thing that we lose the other. A few years ago, we were starting to plant the church here. We were starting this whole thing. And I had a pastor who wanted to meet with me. And he had some questions about what we were planting and what we were doing. And I will never forget this. We went to go sit down and have coffee. and we were sitting talking about planting a church. And he asked me some questions. He said, so what's it going to mean for your family? And I was like, well, I don't know. And he was like, how are you going to handle this financially? So we're hoping that we get money to feed my kids. We'll see how it goes. But we just know that God's called us to plant this church. He's like, well, what are you guys going to do for your church? Like, how are you going to handle like, the finances of the church? Do you have money coming in? We have some, and we'll be figuring it out, but I don't know. We'll get to that when we get there. Well, what about your time? You're going to be really busy trying to plant a church, and so how are you going to see your kids? You know what? Honestly, I don't know. I'm going to have to ask God to just kind of multiply the hours I do have. And I mean, guys, I was getting very discouraged. Like, these questions just kept coming. Well, how are you going to do this? How are you going to do that? And I felt like all the questions were being directed from a very earthly point of view. And I kid you not, I told him, I said, I honestly, I don't know. I don't know how it's all going to come together. I don't know how God's going to provide for all of it. I just know we were called into it. And he looked at me and he said, the only reason I'm asking is because I've thought about doing it too. I've thought about planting a church. And he said these words, but I'm just afraid I can't because I have too much to lose. Too much to lose. And I thought, God, I pray that you bless this church financially. I pray that you take care of my family financially. I pray that you multiply my hours to be with my family. I pray that you help my career to be all it can be, whatever. I pray that you do all those things, God, but I also pray that you never give me too much to the point where it's too much to lose. And some of us, if we're being honest, we've chosen one over the other. And we find ourselves in a place where we think we have too much to lose. Yeah, I hear all the things that Jesus wants me to give up. I hear all the things that he wants me to do. I understand what Lent is. But you know what? I've just got too much to lose. My fear is that when you have too much to lose, you are going to lose something, and it's going to be your soul. What good is it if you gain the world, but you lose your soul? Because you're gaining something too. And right now, my hope today is that if you're in a spot where these things have been unbalanced, maybe you're in a spot where you're like, man, I have been gaining this world like crazy, but something's been sacrificed for it. My prayer is that you find, again, that the answer is you can't do it all, and you're going to have to give up something to make room for something else. And so you may have to give up something to gain something better. You may have to give up parts of this world to be able to regain that soul that God has put within you. My hope is if you're here today and you're like, no, I just feel like I'm in that spot where maybe I have too much to lose. I pray that Jesus would call you into something, that he would call you to get rid of something else so that you do lose something, so that you gain your soul. I pray that if you're in a spot where you're just like too busy and you're too worried and you're too hectic and you're in a spot where you just can't even slow down, that Jesus would remove something from your life. Make you uncomfortable so that you lose parts of what's going on in this world, but you gain back the soul that only he has put within you. We have to find this balance. We have to find both things. We have to balance them out again. And it's not easy, and it's sometimes painful. But I don't know about you. I never want to be in the place where Jesus calls me into something and I say, no, Jesus, I've got too much to lose here on this earth. I've been enjoying this Neverland thing a lot. I'm good with that. And so the way I handle my family, the way I handle my business, the way I handle my money, the way I handle my career, the way I handle my relationships with others, those are mine. I want to be able to give those things over to him and say I don't have too much to lose because I have so much I can gain by giving you these things. So this morning, if you would, I'd ask you to stand. I just want to pray for us before we take off. And one of the things I do, and this is just, again, there's nothing magical to this practice. I'd ask you this morning, one of the things I like to do personally when I pray in the mornings is I put my hands out like this. And if you would do that, you don't have to. There's nothing magical about it. It's just, again, there's science to prove that when you open your hands in this posture, it is physically harder for you to lie. So, so use this in your next meeting with your boss or whatever. But yeah, this is for that reason. That's the only reason I do it, is I like to hold my hands out and just offer these things to God. So if you would, let's pray. I want to pray over you this morning as you go into your week. Jesus, I thank you for this time. I thank you for your word. I thank you for your teachings, and I thank you for what you've shown us, and I thank you just so much for being a God who loves us, a God who pursues us, a God who cares for us. And if we will just turn those things over to you, if we will just turn around and pursue you and love you, that you will help us not just to gain more of this world, but to essentially gain our souls back. We're sorry for the times where we have done things that have just hurt, or we have done things where we have made bad decisions, where we have hurt ourselves, or we have hurt others, or we have hurt you, and we're sorry for those things. Would you remind us of the way that you call us to be disciplined, to be people who have margin in our lives for our careers, for our money, for our own relationships, for our own bodies, that you would remind us of the mortality that we have and remind us that only you can fill us with a spirit. And then when we look for refreshing, when we look for renewal, that we can't look to anywhere else but you, because you designed us and you sustain us. And so when we get to these places where we're so busy and so hectic and so overwhelmed, where we have so much else going on, we start to feel like it's just anything goes and we just go for it into this Neverland type of world. Would you remind us that when we slow down, that you're here to restore us, that you're here to love us. And today, God, if there are some of us in this room who cannot fully answer the question of who we say you are, would you help us to be able to know you more? That when you ask us this question, who do you say I am, we would be able to say, just like Peter did, that you are a Messiah, that you're the one who came to save us, and you're the one who came to save me, not just from this world, but to save me from myself, to save me from the things that I might do in this Pan kind of world. I pray that we be more like Peter and less like Pan, and that you would remind us every single day whose we are and who we are in your presence. I pray these things in your name. Amen. Amen. I love you guys. Have a great week, and we'll see you back here. We'll see you on Saturday for Second Saturday Serve, and we'll see you back here next Sunday.